Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome you all officially to the Brain Big Thinker event, From Efficiency to Peak Performance, Reaching Your Full Potential with Your Digital Brain. My name is Shelley Haydock, and I'm co-hosting today's event with our featured speaker, Omer Aziz, Director of Human Resources at RIM. And Omer, we are very pleased to have you present and share your brain with us today. Thanks for joining us.
No problem, Shelley. Thank you. Well, welcome, everyone. I have to say that I've really been looking forward to doing this. I think this is my third webinar. And just before I get into walking you through my brain, let me just describe it a little bit. So my goal today, just so you're clear, is that today I'd like to stimulate your thinking. That's my primary objective. In the previous webinars, I've kind of shared my brain and shared some ideas, and hopefully have you take some of those ideas back to your brain. Today, I'd like to have you watch me walk through my brain as if I'm using it in a typical day, and hopefully, as a result of that, you'll get your thinking stimulated. So not only will you take away ideas that I'm using, but you'll start to generate your own ideas. And that's the best way to establish your own digital identity or create your own digital signature, so to speak. Because I really feel like my brain now is more than my digital identity. It's kind of my digital style. So a little bit about me. I'm a professional engineer. I've got a bachelor's and master's in civil engineering, and I also am certified as a human resource professional in the province of Ontario in Canada. So I've got these two fields that don't usually go together, which is HR and engineering. I love that, though, because it allows me to translate ideas from one field into the other field, and the brain is perfect for that. And with so many diverse ideas in close proximity to each other, you can't help but generate a whole bunch of new ideas. So let me just orient you to my brain. As you can see, so the format that you see it in now is the way I always have it. I rarely ever change the format. I have the Notes tab always displaying and the Thought tab always displaying. I use tags, and we'll get into that a little more, and they're always handy. So the actual Plex part of my brain takes up this area here, but I always have my notes and my thoughts showing. Last time I did a webinar, I showed this saying from Lao Tzu, which is knowing others is intelligence, knowing yourself is true wisdom, mastering others is strength, mastering yourself is true power. So that's still my kind of underlying guiding principle in terms of continuous improvement. I've added another one since then, which is the saying, there is more in you, which was found in an ancient Greek building that was unearthed and dated to be about 2,000 years old. So there's the two sayings that I think drive me, and the brain couldn't be a better way for me to do that. So something else I'll show you, my contact info, omeraziz459@gmail.com. I encourage you to send me an email if you have any kind of questions or you'd like me to clarify anything related to my brain. I commit to responding to any email I get, so I encourage you to send me an email. Why do I love the brain? I think the main reason that I love the brain is that it helps me leverage my own wet brain's natural power. Basically, it helps me feel like I'm getting smarter instantly. And as I go through my brain, you'll be able to test that for yourself. Whether you've been using the personal brain for years, or you're relatively new at it, or you're even thinking about using it, I want you to test for yourself to see if you feel smarter by vicariously going through my brain. So let me start with some thoughts I have pinned at the top here. And the first thought I'm going to start at is a thought to insight. And this is related to a demo I did quite a while ago. And this basically, again, just talks about what the brain is about. And I think the core idea is that it's a workspace that closely resembles how we think. And because it resembles how we think, I find I can think quite effectively using the brain. And as you can see, I like using color, I like using thought types, I like using icons, and I'll describe all of them. So whenever I show a thought, and you can see child thoughts underneath and jump thoughts, together as a whole with the combination of colors and thought types, that basically presents me a picture, even before I start reading the words, that allows me to create an awareness explicitly in my consciousness. So what does every brain love to do. So every brain, and I'm talking about the brain in our head, every brain loves to make associations, and this happens automatically. And we tend to make associations around people. We tend to make associations around kind of a location in space or geography, and around a location in time or event. So those are the three fundamental thought types that I work with, because our brain just naturally makes associations with each of those things. So if I look at events, and what you're seeing is an extract from the brain that I use every single day. So I've got different types of recurring events built into my events thought folder. And in 2012, we had these monthly ops reviews that happened throughout the year, and I've already built the 2013 ops reviews, January to December. Now, one thing that you'll notice, there are no thought types on these events. So typically what I do is I just click with the control key pushed at this button here, which highlights every thought underneath this parent thought. And then when I go over here, I can change the thought type of all of these thoughts to event. And now all these thoughts are shown as events. And wherever they show up in the brain, I'll be able to tell instantly that we're talking about a thought type, which is an event. And again, you'll see the benefit of that in a few minutes. So the other thing I would like to show you here in Thought to Insight demo, let me just quickly show you something related to talent. So talent is a survey put out by Gallup that I did, feels like about 10 years ago now, and I have a brief description. In my thought folder, I have a document that shows a brief description of every talent. And one of the talents that I happen to have is something called intellection. And the short form description is someone, especially talented in intellection, loves to practice their intellectual activity. And hopefully that'll give you a little bit of understanding why I love using something like the personal brain so much. Another talent I do happen to have is learner. And people who are talented in the learner theme love to learn. It almost doesn't matter what the topic is, and it doesn't matter what the outcome of it is. They just love the process of learning. So again, these two talents together, plus the fact that the personal brain resembles how we think, is the reason I love using it so much. Now, after I started using the brain, I decided to take a structured approach to getting more productive. So I found the personal brain kind of amplified my thinking, but I still needed to get some more help in terms of how I want to actually get things done, productivity. And so I did quite a bit of reading of a book called Getting Things Done by the author David Allen, and I basically incorporated that methodology within the brain. And I've just clicked on the Getting Things Done thought here. And what you can see is a couple of, every time I hear David Allen speak or I reread the book, I might get another salient point, and I include it in this area. So this area kind of overviews the Getting Things Done methodology in a nutshell. So basically, it's about capturing everything. So you've got nothing rolling around in an inbox, you've got nothing rolling around in your head, everything's captured, and you've made a decision about everything. If I was to summarize Getting Things Done right down to its essence, it would probably be this here, which is called this thought type, which is a question. What are the zeros and ones of business productivity? So what's the binary language of business productivity? I heard him use this term at a TEDx talk he did. And it really comes down to this. Whenever you're thinking about a piece of work you have to do, you should do two things. The first thing you should do is continually focus on what the outcome needs to be. Visualize the outcome. The second thing you should do is take the next action that has no dependency on the most important thing towards getting to that outcome. In a nutshell, that's what Getting Things Done is all about. And that's the process that I've been using for probably about 4 or 5 years now. I have thought types that are project thought types. And we're going to go over that in a little more detail. I have strategic next action thought types. I have outcome thought types or wild success. And I've incorporated this methodology completely in my brain. So the other place I'm going to take you now is something called core dump. Core dump is a process that David Allen again recommends, where if you've got something rolling around in your mind, but you're not sure you're not quite sure what to do about it, you should basically dump it out onto a piece of paper, or in my case, I dump it out onto the brain. And here are some examples, and these are, I assure you, these aren't real examples. My daughter's not mad at me. But these are examples of things that might be rolling around in your brain. And so let's pick this one, for example. Light bulbs burnt out in the fridge. So what's the strategic next action for this one? And basically, if you picture the outcome first, the ideal outcome is you're standing at the hardware store with the burnt out bulb in your hand, so you know exactly which bulb to buy because there's a whole rack. And so what that translates to is, the way I would approach it is take burnt bulb and place in glove compartment. So I don't know when I'm going to go to the hardware store, but I've given myself an action. And here's how I change the thought type to action. And I use tags. And the context for this one, the context I need to be in to be able to do this thought is at home. So there's the action I've given myself, was to take that bulb and put it in the glove compartment. The second action I give myself is go to hardware store and take burnt bulb for replacement. This is an action. Now, the other way you can pick a thought type is if you hit Control, Shift, and the letter T, then your thought types pop up. And then if you hit Control T, your tags pop up. Now, this tag, I don't need to be in the house for this one. I need to be out doing an errand. And this would be one of the tasks I would do on my errand. So the significance of using tags is if I go down here and I click on the home tag, what immediately pops up is every task I have to do when I'm at home. So as you can see, there's a collection of really unrelated tasks. The only thing they have in common is they all involve me being at home. So when I'm at home, I can click on this tag and pick the actions that I want to do. If I know I'm going to be going out to the car shortly, I'll just grab this, put it in the glove compartment, forget about it. Then, when I'm out on an errand, I click, before I head out, I click on this, and basically all the tasks that I have to do when I'm on an errand present. So this is kind of an example of how you use the getting things done methodology. So far I've shown you strategic next action as a thought type, and I've shown you a tag that links to the context. Let's look at another one here, a work-related one. A project update is due to your VP in 2 days. So one of the things that David Allen does talk about is that time gets distorted when you feel the pressure of stress. And so when you look at this one, you might, subconsciously feel quite a bit of stress because you have to present something to your VP in a couple of days. If you focus on what the outcome is, for me on this one, the successful outcome is me understanding what exactly project update means, because that can mean quite a few different things. And the way I would approach this one is that my VP is looking for a project update in a very simple format, probably on one page. He doesn't want to go into a lot of detail. So that helps me kind of clarify, this is probably going to be a project in itself, and the definition of project that I use is anything that takes more than one activity to complete. So anything that takes 2 or more activities, I call a project. So in this case, the project would be create one-page summary of project. Assuming it was a specific project, I would then create that here. I would call it a project. And I would use a one-page methodology that we're going to talk about later, but I would put it here. So when I'm ready to work on this, I can click to the information that I would need. So at this point in time, this is all I need to do to plan for this stressful item rolling around in my head. And when I come back to this, I'll be able to actually execute it fairly quickly. So that's the core dump kind of methodology that David Allen talks about. I think the other thing I'd like to show you here is something called a strong week. Now, this is a week. One of the things that David Allen recommends is that doing a weekly review every week or two helps you kind of plan for the upcoming period of time. And I find if I spend 5 minutes here, I feel well prepared for the following week. So within Strong Week, I have events that are coming up. And so if I have a leadership meeting coming up, then I have an opportunity to plan for them. What you can see here is the ops meetings that I referred to earlier happen every month. The leadership meetings happen every week. And so January 15th, 22nd. So the first thing I would do is I would create a new thought. There will be one on January 29th. I would highlight all of these thoughts by clicking this thought button here, changing all of the types to, now you'll notice I have two thought types. I have something called event and something called meeting. Typically what I do, and again, you have your own flexibility, I like the fact that I have both, and quite frankly, sometimes I might use one over the other without a whole lot of logic, because I like the flexibility and it'll help me clarify where I'm kind of landing is if an event, if a meeting happens on a recurring basis, I typically tend to call it an event. And so change all the thought types to events. The next one coming up is January 8th. I've already created two topics for this meeting. These topics I could have created at any time, and I would have just said to myself, there's a good topic that we should talk about at our next leadership meeting, and I just would have created this thought, and you'll notice I have a thought type called topic. So if I'm preparing for this meeting the night before, I can create my slides literally the night before, because basically all the information I need presents itself. In this case, there's going to be two topics. We're going to review the budget submission, and we're going to discuss key talent. If I go to key talent, there's a person here, and I will come back to what that's all about in a minute. So that's how I use Strong Week, is I basically prepare for upcoming meetings or catch up on any projects that need some more attention. So let me go to focus areas, which is another thought type that is referenced within getting things done. Throughout the last 3 or 4 years, I've had anywhere from 15 to 20 different focus areas, and I've finally distilled down to these 6. And these 6 are the actual focus areas that are within my everyday working brain. And I found 15 to 20 were too many. It actually didn't allow me to focus, and there was quite a bit of overlap. So I have these 6. They cover all aspects of my life, whether it be personal or work. And if I take you to something called professional development, you can see some projects that I have on the go related to professional development. And we can spend a couple minutes going through any or all of these projects. Let me take a moment and pause. I've covered quite a bit of material so far. I've covered the getting things done methodology at a high level. And Shelley, let me turn it over to you, A, to see if you have any questions, which I'd be glad to answer, and B, maybe you can pick which project we can spend some time on.
Great. Yes, there have been a lot of questions, and you've really whet our appetite in terms of how you're using the brain and just your thought process behind it. One of the questions that had been coming in is about the strategic next action, and a couple of you asked what SNA stood for, and of course that's strategic next action. More specifically, Omar, at a higher level, what we're wondering is, how far do you go in capturing all this information, and what benefit specifically does the capture of this information bring to you? And I guess that's almost more of a GTD question. I know, David Allen would sort of talk about, psychological relief and taking control. And is that sort of your approach to capturing things? And for our users to understand the benefits of this approach, how would you articulate and describe that, in your own personal life and business?
Okay, that's a very good question. I think I would answer that question 3 ways. Firstly, I would use this quote that I've heard David Allen use before, which is, you can only feel good about what you're not doing when you know what you're not doing. So that quote really resonates with me. If I have a huge list of everything I have to do, I am totally comfortable not doing any of it, because I know it's all there, ready to be picked from when I'm ready to do it. That's a very different feeling than having kind of nebulous, ambiguous thoughts rolling around in your head. So that's one reason I do it. The second reason I do it is I literally track every single strategic next action related to every single project all in one spot, which is the brain. And so I don't have to wonder where my actions lie, because the trigger for my action all lie here. And I was actually joking about this a little earlier, is that I'll even put an action into my brain where it might be almost easier to actually do the action. But if I'm in the mode where I'm collecting actions, even if one of them only takes me 30 seconds or a minute to go off and do, more often than not I won't do it because I want to continue capturing actions. So that's the second reason. And the third reason I use the strategic next action approach is, again, because your brain naturally makes associations, the actions you think you need to do are not close to the list that you actually realize you need to do just by trolling through each project. If I go to a project, just by looking at the title, I will get immediate ideas on actions I can do. So it helps me generate actions that will all take me in the right direction that I wouldn't have normally thought so otherwise. So 3 kind of different reasons why I literally put every single strategic action I have into the brain. Does that answer that question, Shelley?
Yes, that's very helpful. I think it's also very inspiring. Now I'd like to take a step back, Omar, and ask you, this very, intricate and intellectual brain, to talk a little bit about the architecture of that for the users. And I don't know if you have sort of the root thought or the starting thought. There were a lot of questions about, when to use a thought type or thought tag. But before we get to that, if you could just maybe start at the root of your thought, or talk about what the key areas are, and what are the key sections of this brain, and how does it all come together? How did you start to create it, and what choices did you make in the way you decided to link things together?
Okay, sure. So where it started for me was literally right here, is I just created these 3 thought types because I thought that most of my associations would be captured just by being triggered by these 3 things. So that's where I started.
Mm-hmm. So that's very interesting. So we could all start with events, clients, and I'm sorry, what is the third? Places. So these sort of 3 thoughts, or almost Archimedean points within your brain, really give you this ability to sort of triangulate and make this strategic view of your entire life.
Yeah, it's really as simple as these 3 things. Because
okay.
if I go to places, for example, and here are the 2 cities that I go back and forth between quite a bit, between my work and where I moved from, just this thought alone triggers me in many different ways in terms of people I need to go visit, tasks I need to do when I'm in this town. So the triggering happens automatically. So I started with these 3, and then let me just quickly go to the top of my brain. Because after I added, so here's the top of my brain. So after I added the getting things done methodology, you can see that I used something called a focus area. And a focus area, which I've covered already, is my six areas that cover my whole life. And any project, a rule of thumb is any project you have on the go should be able to map to one of these 6 focus areas. If it doesn't, then that tells you one of 2 things. You're either doing a project that you don't need to do, or you're missing a focus area. So I've spent quite a bit of time making sure that my projects are aligned with my focus areas. And then David Allen does talk about purpose and core principles, talks about values, goals, and objectives. I'm still playing around with some of those terms because I'm using different methodologies, so I haven't quite decided yet. Where I'm more or less landing is above focus areas. I will have goals and objectives, and goals and objectives don't have to have strategic actions underneath them. What they do is trigger projects that you want to do, and then in turn those projects will trigger strategic next actions. So if you're looking at this, if the analogy you use is perspective as an elevation, then goals and objectives are kind of one level higher than focus areas. And purpose would be one level higher than goals and objectives. Something else I'm playing around with is something I call strong Omer. And strong Omer is the different roles that I want to play. So roles that I want to play is another approach I'm using to trigger. It's all about triggering, doing the right projects that line up to focus areas. So whatever thoughts or thought types that you feel will trigger you doing projects is what I would recommend. So I hope that gives you an idea of the overall architecture. It's fairly straightforward in that here's the top, here's focus areas where I tend to spend the vast majority of my time. I do have goals and objectives that I visit probably 3 or 4 times a year, and I have this purpose and core principles which I visit, less than once a year.
Excellent. Now, in terms of your focus areas, I think that would be a great area to dive in deeper. There are a lot of areas. Maybe we could start with the professional development and HR, since I know we have a lot of business users and HR users, and then go into the personal aspect and the fun aspect as well, because of course we also have a lot of home users and that use the brain just as life management as well. So in fact, all these areas are relevant. So, but maybe we can start off with the professional and areas of focus.
Okay. So then, before I pick, no problem at all. Before I pick one of these projects here, just to close on your previous question, let me spend a couple of minutes on my thought types. And you can see the list here, and then we'll jump into one of these projects. As you can see, I've got a list of about 25 or so thought types. These thought types have evolved over time. I have no problem at all creating and deleting thought types. Under the project thought type, I use project as a super type, and I have some subtypes that typically show up under a project, so they're very easy for me to find if I have them as instead of being ordered alphabetically in a long list, I've created a super type and have some subtypes that I can quickly grab. Anything else I want to show about types? You can see more often than not, I do try to import an icon so that sometimes I don't even need to read what kind of thought type it is. If I see a green vertical arrow, I know instantly that that's a sign that I'm on the right track. If I see a downward red arrow, that's a sign I'm on the wrong track. I just know that instantly. So I try to take advantage of graphics where I can. And let me start with one of these projects. Did you want to pick a project here, Shelley?
Sure, but real quick, since you did, I'm glad you circled back on the thought types. Can you also explain to our users, before we go into the project, how you distinguish, and we get this question a lot in support as well, but this is a great example because you have so many thought types and tags. What distinguishes and defines from you whether something is a thought type versus a thought tag?
Okay, that's a very good question too. So, and again, I don't be afraid to experiment. I've gone back and forth. Where I've landed is a thought tag for me is purely contextual. So when I have an action to do, I use the thought tags to capture the context. Now you will see some tags here that start with the letter T and have a label like executing, influencing. This section, these last 4 tags were related to something else I was trying on talents. I'll probably be eliminating them shortly. And so my only remaining tags will be context. And so if I'm waiting for something from someone, it's a tag. If I need to do it at home, it's a tag. If I need to send an email, it's a tag. So for me, tags are contextual. Thought types are more related to the getting things done methodology in terms of tracking project versus strategic next action, as well as I'm playing around with thought types where I now try to use the thought type to actually almost render information like a scorecard. And I'll show you what I mean. Let me go to this project example. So here's the project example. Basically, a project would be made up of what wild success looks like, what the core purpose of the project is, clarify some signs you're on the right track, on the wrong track, the components or tasks you have to get done, and any other salient information that you might want to summarize as you're having your project meetings. So in essence, remember the one-page project summary that was needed for the VP? These thought types render information just by their color and the icon I use. So I use thought types to render information in real time. I use tags to clarify what context I need to be to get actions done.
Right, and also just for the sake of the benefit of some of our newer users, let me also add to that, a thought type, you can only have one thought type per thought, so that's where it is more of a categorical distinction, whereas a tag, you can have multiple tags per thought, so that also might govern how you'd use them. And I think I really do like your example of the types and tags, and I think it's very useful for all of us to get a sense of how those two pieces of metadata, those powerful features of the brain, can really come into play at a project management level.
Yeah, and so you can see that's a very good point, because sometimes you might not be sure of the context. So for example, as you were talking, Shelley, I just gave 3 tags to this priority action, and if you go down here and I hit email, then that priority action of clarify the schedule with the sponsor is there. If I hit one-on-one, the priority action is there. So no matter, I'm not sure how I'm going to clarify the schedule with the sponsor, so I cover all my bases by covering whichever contextual chat tag might apply. So this very important action will present a few different ways. So that's another good reason why I would use context for tag. And all I need to know about this action is, because it's pink with this kind of icon I created here, it tells me right away, whenever I see this color action under my projects, I know I need to focus on that right away. Sometimes what I might also do is, you'll notice I have a thought type called this week. I might just grab this and just put it here. And then at the beginning of the week, when I click on this week, all of the important actions just immediately present themselves. So the difference between this week and strong week is something I do on a regular basis every week. You know, go through all my meetings in a general way. This week is literally, what do I have on the runway coming down next week?
And then when this week is finished, do you then unlink and link somewhere else, or delete those thoughts? Obviously, when you're getting into categorization, which I think is very helpful from a getting things done perspective to organize your week, what happens when you've accomplished, you know, calling Bell, or you've captured those open loops, or you finalized that Q4 budget? Where would that piece of information go, and how would you then transition it somewhere else in your brain?
Oh, okay. So one rule of thumb I try to follow is I never create a thought from this week. I always want the thought to be associated to other things, like a project, like a focus area, and then I just link it to this week. So more often than not, for strategic next actions, when I've done the action, I personally don't feel the need to archive these types of actions, so I just go ahead and forget.
Right, exactly.
Go ahead and forget them. If there's something I haven't done yet, then I'll leave it under this week, because this week is a perpetual term and it'll stay there. Google Maps for Boston. So if I'm going to make a trip and I've made myself a note to go look up some maps, when I've done that task, I've probably put those maps in some reference area. I have a thought type called reference. And so once I've done that, let me just show you where reference material. So once I've done that, then I would eliminate this as well. So I'd love to say that this week is emptied at the end of every week. That's not completely true. Where actions are done, I forget them, and if I see the need to unlink something because that didn't happen and doesn't expect to be happen next week, I have no problem unlinking. I know I'm not going to leave this as an orphan, because, as I mentioned, the rule of thumb I have is it only shows up here when it's connected somewhere else.
Right. So in other words, if you did unlink, it would be then by default connected to something else. And I love that idea that you create all these thoughts, but you're not afraid to forget it. And I think that's something for us to take away on this session as well, that we can create these transient thoughts that we're just using for the day or the week, and then we can come back in and delete it. I know a lot of our users like to think of the brain as sort of this fixed structure that has to be perfected, all in one session. But what I'm loving and seeing, come to life in your example is that this brain is something that, is actively, thoughts are being created and forgotten literally every day in this strong weak area. And that's a great, there's a lot of activity in this brain.
Yeah, and I've never used thought types in a static way. I find changing the thought type is something I do often. And so sometimes something that might be a positive sign this week might actually turn into a negative sign the week following. And I have no problem changing that thought type when a project is done, as a matter of course. So I don't forget projects. I archive projects. And so I have a thought type that's called project inactive. And so changing thought types is part of my reference information. So I change thought types all the time. So would you like me to show you some of the projects I'm working on related to project planning? Or again, whenever I read or learn something that I find very interesting, the first thing I try to do is somehow incorporate it into my brain. So would you like me to go through any of these examples here?
Yes, in fact, there are a couple that jumped out. Any that you think would be of benefit, of course, to us, but the creativity templates and the succession planning, those caught my eye immediately.
Sure. Okay, well, let me start with succession planning. So this is related to if you happen to be in the field of HR. Succession planning is a pretty crucial talent management activity that most companies try to go through. And basically, what I've done is I've created a thought type called critical positions. So one of the first things that you do within a company is articulate what positions are considered to be critical. Ideally, you want successors who are immediately available for all of your critical positions. That's the kind of goal of succession planning. And then I have critical talent. You might recall this person was referenced back when I showed that January 8th meeting. So let me show you critical positions. So Chief Legal Officer. Now this is where I use links. So what you can see are there are three people who are successors for the CLO, and you can tell immediately that two of them I used kind of a pinkish hue for long-term successors, yellow for medium-term, and green for immediate. So the first piece of information that presents itself just through the way I use links is that there's no immediate successor for the Chief Legal Officer position. And so from a succession planning perspective, in fact, that's probably an action, no immediate successor. That's probably an action to be discussed at a leadership meeting. So I would create that as a topic, and I would probably want to bring that up as soon as I could. So if you go back to that January 8th leadership meeting I was referring to, we now have three topics to talk about. One is we don't have an immediate successor for the CLO position. The other way I use succession planning is, let me show you the Chief Marketing Officer position. And he has two roles. He has more than two roles, but I'm just highlighting two roles here. One of them is the Director of Consumer Brand. You'll notice it doesn't have a thought type. And if I just click on it, the information that immediately presents is there are 4 successors. One is immediately available, one is long-term, one is medium, one is unknown. So the first question I would have for myself in terms of succession planning is this a critical role? Because right now that's unknown. So that needs to be clarified. And I would just, again, typically what I do is I just create a topic, and if I'm not sure what meeting it's going to be covered at, then I might just put it under the leadership meeting thought in general. And so I haven't scheduled it yet, but I know this is a topic that needs to be discussed. So we need to clarify if this is a critical role. If it is, then I would capture it this way. And you can see we have an immediate successor, which is a good sign. And if I click on this person, some information presents right away. So first of all, you can see he's an immediate successor for this role. Secondly, I happen to know what the talents of this person are, and so I can click on those talents. And maybe what I'll do is I'll highlight all the talents, and I'll link them directly to his name. And then look at the information you're looking at now. You have a sense of what that person's talents are. You have a sense of where he's an immediate successor as part of your succession plan. And so you also see that he's on the agenda for the January 8th meeting because he's considered to be key talent. So you see how much information presents itself, not through my having to do anything else, but just through the thought types and links I use. I know a lot about Barry just by what we're looking at right now. So that's kind of a flavor of how succession planning would work. And if I go back to success, sometimes I forget exactly where I was, and instead of trying to get back up to the project, I just go top down. I go to focus areas, professional development. We were talking about succession planning. Now I'm back at the top of that project. And for critical talent, we've already walked through Barry. We can go through the other roles. Maybe here for the Chief Operating Officer, we can clarify which critical roles he has. We can talk about the key talent he or she may highlight. We can talk about whether they're immediate successors. So I can actually facilitate a succession planning discussion without a lot of upfront work in preparing for it. I can just very quickly create a few thought types, throw in information that I know, and then the rest is through the dialogue that I can facilitate in real time with whoever would have an interest and a view on the critical succession planning plans for these positions. So that's how I use succession planning within the brain. Any questions on that, Shelley?
I think that's really helpful in terms of, I guess that might also tie into, you know, the aspect of training and getting into that as well. You know, so you're planning for, you know, positions and how things evolve in the organization. How does that relate to, you know, training your staff so that they can fill some of these gaps themselves and move into some of these roles?
So that's a very good question, because now we're kind of getting into talent management in general as a component of succession planning. And I think if we start viewing critical talent person by person, there are some themes that we can start to see here. And again, if I go back to Barry, so this information here, as well as maybe a conversation with his leader and maybe the holder of this critical role, is all the context you need to clarify what kind of talent Barry might need. And so some of the things that you can do when you're planning out talent management is you can, right under the position, you can say critical skill requirement. And so the minimum level of talent or requirements, you can actually clarify through the conversation. And I don't know if at this point, until I have more time to think about it, I would probably just call it a project. And in here, I might put regional marketing and sales training. And so if this is a critical requirement, then you can start. And so again, I might call this a salient point at this point. And then we can start very easily tracking who has taken that training and who hasn't. And as you build this up over time, you'll be able to tell, again, if we go back to, let's say Barry's taken that course. If we go back to Barry, now there's another piece of information we see here is he's taken this training that's a critical requirement for this role. And what I might do to make it simpler is I might actually link it directly to the role. And so now when we present this, you can see quite a bit of information here. So just by going through this process at the speed I'm going at, you can actually clarify some pretty critical talent training requirements through the succession planning discussion.
Excellent. And in terms of succession planning in some of these areas, is this more for your own personal planning, or is this something that you would throw up on maybe a projector screen when you're meeting with other team members? Do you share aspects of your brain, or would you show people these plans that you have within your brain?
So for the leadership meetings, for example, I would actually let's go to the leadership meeting. So when we meet on January 8th, now keep in mind this is not my actual brain. This is kind of a conceptual extract. So when we go to that January 8th meeting, discuss some key talent plans is a topic, and I would literally click here, and we would through looking at this on the projector with everyone in that leadership meeting have a discussion about Barry, and I would facilitate that discussion by displaying this on the screen. So I actually facilitate the conversations in real time using the brain.
Excellent.
Now, can I show you something else that we've tried related to creativity templates?
That would be great.
Okay, so this was referenced in a book called Made to Stick, and what it talks about, there's a paper it references. I have the paper right in the brain, so if I bring this up as a topic and someone happens to ask for it, I can immediately send them the article. Now, the article is fairly long and kind of dry, but very interesting. And what I did was I built in one of the templates for creativity is something called a pictorial analogy, and so I built that right into the brain. And a pictorial analogy, let me just show you an example, is pick your message space. So let's say my message space was France. So I create a place called France, and as you know, I have a thought type called places. So when you think of France, what comes to mind? So probably, and please don't, okay, I'm glad it's here, so I don't have to worry about spelling it incorrectly. The Eiffel Tower. What else comes to mind when you think about France? Shelley, you want to throw a couple out?
Oh, good food. Food.
Food. And so can you give me an example of some food? What's an example?
Crepes.
Grapes. Can I say croissants?
Yes. Oh, look, you even have a croissant in your brain already.
I do. This is a bit of a leading exercise. And so you've created some associations just related to France, and one of them is croissant. Now go back up to product space, and let's say we're talking about tennis. And so for tennis, rattle off a couple of things that come to your mind when you think about tennis.
Health and fitness.
Health and fitness. And so you see how I tend to try to facilitate the discussion in real time using the brain. Tennis racket, tennis ball.
Tennis courts.
So, tennis courts. So what this paper recommends is that you...
New running shoes.
Running shoes? Geez, you're on a roll now, Shelley. Running shoes.
Yeah, I can't. This is very inspiring. I like this.
And so if we go to tennis balls, and let's take tennis ball, and let's bring it right up to the pictorial analogy, and let's go to the message space, and let's go to France, and let's bring croissant up to, I'll bring it up to here, and then I'll bring it up to the pictorial analogy. What this template recommends is, okay, take croissant and tennis ball, and create a link between the two of them. And what I'm showing you is a real example of an advertising campaign that did exactly that. And so here's Penn's advertising campaign for the French Open going back in 1998, where they basically took a croissant and show it made of tennis ball material. So it's as easy as that in terms of kind of using a creativity template. So we did that in a couple of minutes, and you see this ad went over quite well, actually. And so there's an example of using a creativity template within the brain.
Wow, that's really interesting. And of course, the brain is uniquely positioned because any piece of information can be connected to anything else. So you can, on like a file folder system, or even more traditional mind maps in the brain, you can literally make associative connections and cross-connect. So I can see, that's definitely an area. The hallmark of creative thinking is associative connections. I can see how that would work. And in my own brain, I'm thinking, well, I'm going to go play tennis, and then I'm going to have a picnic with some croissants maybe next weekend. Well, not next weekend, it's Christmas. Maybe a weekend or two after that. I'm lucky here in California. There's no snow. So full disclosure here.
I'm looking out the window, and I won't be playing tennis anytime soon.
Right.
How we created these two thoughts, we created them from two completely different triggers. And as you mentioned, I can even link them. I can make the tennis ball the jump thought to the croissant. And then just by looking at those two together is how they came up with that advertising campaign. Another creativity template that I have used, where I facilitated a group of about 20 people, is something called the Bono random word exercise. And again, I built this right into the brain. So the first thing I do is I have people pick a number between 1 and 60. And for example, if they pick 34, I then have them think of anything they can think of associated with kitchen. And you can see 4 examples: eating toaster, activity center, and chef. The problem they were trying to solve were new ways to recognize employee performance. So now you take eating and new ways to recognize employee performance, and those two linked together for the idea of having a monthly recognition dinner with the CEO. Take a look at toaster and how to recognize employees, toast employees at a monthly celebration, pop into employees' offices. And so just through this very simple random word exercise, we came up with, 20 people coalesced around 6 ideas on how to recognize employees, all within about 5 minutes or so. And any one of these can now turn into a project that someone can be asked, maybe Barry, wouldn't hurt for him before he takes over that marketing role, to actually run a project that has colleagues surrounded by people with food as part of their recognition. So you see how any part of the brain can be connected with any other part of the brain, even things that seem totally unrelated. And creativity, it doesn't take a lot to spark creativity. All you have to do is take 2 completely different thoughts, connect them together, and let your wet brain cascade with some ideas. So those are some of the examples where I'm now trying to take what I'm learning or what I'm reading, and I'm trying to facilitate a broader discussion with other people instead of just using it to stimulate my own productivity. And that's where I'm kind of trying to go to peak performance by having others join in idea generation within my brain.
Excellent. And then finally, and then we're going to turn it over to Matt, who's actually, Matt, I've sort of been glancing at the questions in and out of watching the presentation. We'll turn it over to Matt to get into our in-depth Q&A session. But real quick, since we are talking about going from, efficiency to peak performance, what thoughts in your brain have helped you achieve your own peak performance?
So that's a very good question. I think one of the things that I find very helpful in terms of my peak performance is something I call strong moments. So one of the things that I do, let me show you an example. So what I try to do is every once in a while I kind of do a brain dump of strong moments. And a strong moment is anything I did that gave some kind of emotional high, and I just capture them all. And you can see these are examples from October 2nd. And then if I look at this one, preparation with Janet for this meeting I was having with Fred was a strong moment for me. And right now I'm not immediately sure why it was, but if I click on this and I take a look at Janet here, one of the reasons it was such a strong moment is her talents are actually quite different than my talents. And so the realization I had is that I like collaborating with Janet because our talents are so complementary and so different that we end up generating ideas that neither one of us could have generated alone. And in this case, it helped me prepare for a meeting I was having with someone. Having that kind of other half, so to speak, because her talents are so different, helped me prepare for this meeting was a realization of mine. The more I can collaborate with people whose talents are quite different than mine, the more it helps my peak performance. So just capturing and then going a little bit underneath my strong moments has actually ended up helping me not only capture strong moments, but in a way consciously create more strong moments. And that's had a huge impact in terms of my own productivity. And when you look at these strong moments, you can actually get a flavor for what is it that that gives me that jolt of productivity. What are the things that I like to do? Just looking at this list starts to give you a flavor of that. So that's one way that
it's almost like you're creating a new level of self-awareness by getting it all out there in your brain and being able to shape those aspects of yourself further by seeing it in your digital brain.
Yeah, I think, there's kind of this healthy relationship between my digital brain and my web brain. I never would have, if this was all in my head, although it seems obvious when you look at it here, I never would have consciously thought about it this way, where this set of talents is why the combination with my talents made for a very effective preparation for a meeting. I never would have thought of it that way. Now that I see that, I can think of all kinds of other meetings I can have this person help me prepare for because they're meetings similar to this one. So it really has raised my own self-awareness. So I see that we're almost at the hour. So should I pause now for any other questions?
You know what? Yes, we will. And if you're okay, Omar, and any attendees that can stay, maybe we'll run another 5 to 10 minutes over the hour because we do have a number of questions coming in through the Q&A. So at this point, I think what we'll do is, yes, we'll pause. And Matt, because Matt and Tracy, you've been earnestly typing away, answering a lot of the questions. Why don't you throw to Omar and I some of the questions that have come in through the Q&A throughout our session so we can explicitly address them for the benefit of the group. And I'm going to start that off by just a lot of people are asking about mobile access on their brain. So I just want to mention you can synchronize and upload your brain to the cloud, and that is secure. It's RSA encrypted, so the same encryption that is acceptable for government and military, completely private. You can do that, and then you can access that on your iPhone, on your Android device, and not just access it in a read-only mode. You can actually create thoughts by long pressing to create thoughts as well. That's a little beyond the scope of the session today, but that's usually a GTD question. But I just want to bring that up because I did see that coming up in the Q&A. As far as mobile access, yes, you can do that, and yes, that's done through our cloud services. And with that, Matt, I'm going to hand it over to you to fire off some questions to Omer.
Great, thanks, and thank you everyone for answering all these great questions, or asking all these great questions. You've really been keeping Tracy and I on our toes, and we do apologize if we don't get to all the questions. There are so many coming in, but we do have some really, really great questions for you, Omer. First off, everyone is really enjoying what they're seeing and like seeing your brain, and the question that's coming up, Jim asked first, and it came up several other times, is will we be able to share, or will you be sharing, or will we be able to download a sample version of this particular brain in the future?
Absolutely, Matt. I think what I'll do is I'll just take a few minutes. I built this as an extract from my real brain, so I'll just spend a bit of time just to kind of give it one more scrub, but I'll be more than happy to make it available just to give you an idea of the structure of types I use and some of this content. So absolutely.
Great, thank you. And so then we'll get that copy of Omer's Brain and share it with everyone in the that's joined us today. We'll be able to send out an email and let you know where and when that scrubbed version of Omer's Brain would be available. So thank you, Omer, for making that publicly available for us. And Jackie had the question, how old is this particular brain, and how much time on a day-to-day basis do you spend going through or using the brain?
Well, thanks for that question, Jackie. I think this brain is relatively new, but it's drawn from the extract of my main brain, and my main brain is probably about 4 or 5 years old now. In terms of how often do I use it, I literally do all of my work out of the brain. And so for me, it's well worth the investment of having 2 monitors, and on one monitor, my brain always resides. So I spend almost all of my time in the brain. Now, I've gotten that question before, and sometimes the question that I'm asked is, well, is that spending too much, is that taking up too much of your time? And I don't see it that way at all, because I literally do my work out of the brain. I have my ideas out of the brain. I plan my work. I plan meetings. I literally work out of my brain. So I would say that on any given day, if I'm not in a meeting or doing my email, I'm on my brain.
Great.
Now,
and, go ahead.
Can I just have one more comment, though, Matt, if you don't mind? Okay. Although this brain is, is drawn from a brain that's fairly old, I still, if I was creating a brain from scratch, as I'd mentioned before, I would. So if I was to start with a brand new brain, the first thing I would do is I would call the home thought strong Omer. That just seems to kind of drive my thinking. And I would, before I even worried about types or tags, I would just create some thoughts to get my thinking going. If you use a semicolon between your thoughts, then you'll see what happens here. And so events, places, people. So I'd create those thoughts. I would start thinking about what some of the events are that I have. I would start thinking about some people that are important to me. And you can see how I can just keep going forever, starting with a brain that I just literally created. So although my brain has been, it has becoming quite old now and quite seasoned, for lack of a better term, if I was to start tomorrow with a blank brain, I have some ideas of where I'd start that would just then cause it to organically grow in a productive way. If I was doing succession planning off the cuff, I wouldn't even necessarily open up the other brain. I could just create a succession planning session brain instantly. So I hope that answers that question.
Fantastic. And that is actually a nice transition into Rich's question. He noticed that you're keeping track of so many different tasks and to-dos and things like that. What happens when one expires? What's your choice? Do you archive or do you delete the task out of the brain?
So in terms of a strategic next action, I've become very comfortable deleting them. A strategic next action for me is all about focusing on the outcome. It's the outcome that I need to archive and keep. Whatever task I do on any given day that gets me a step closer to the outcome is not something that I feel necessary to keep. Which doesn't mean you don't have to. I just choose not to.
Sure. Great. And also, Caesar noticed that you were using the comma from time to time. There was a particular area when we were doing our, the example with the Paris and tennis, and he noticed a couple of new thoughts you were creating had the comma. Can you show us some examples of where you use the comma trick? And as Omer will show you, the comma trick is just a really great way to have a nice lineage of thoughts through the brain. So you're basically carrying the parent thought down through the child thought names and so on. So if you could show us some examples of where the comma trick comes into play.
Sure, I'd be glad to. Let me actually show you an area I haven't gone to yet on this meeting. So there's another book that I read called Pillars of Self-Esteem that, again, I found very, very interesting. It's by the author is Nathaniel Brandon. And he articulates 6 areas you should focus on to maintain positive self-esteem. So let's say I was using this approach to coach someone. And that doesn't necessarily mean that that person has low self-esteem, for the record. So let's say famous Barry is back, and we're having a conversation around one of the disciplines, which is living consciously. And one of the things that Nathaniel Brandon recommends is something called a sentence completion. So let's say I was sitting with Barry, and I've walked him through the definition of self-esteem, and I would probably just use this right here, and you can again see positive signs, negative signs. You see the thought types that I tend to use on a regular basis. I would have him do some sentence completion. If I bring 5% more awareness to, and I would have him fill in the sentence, and let's say he said something like 5% more awareness to what I do when I arrive in the morning. So let's say he says that. So I, just out of habit, always put a comma in. So now here's, what this now means is, here's an answer which is related to this discipline. So the comma means it captures the title of the parent thought, and then I would put that under Barry. And then when you click on Barry now, one of the pieces of information I can tell immediately is we've talked about self-esteem, and he's already given me a sentence completion on the first discipline. So I would just know that instantly because I used a comma when I captured it.
Excellent. And just a few more questions. One from Ken. We're obviously in what we call the normal view, the current active thought, and one generation away from the active thought. Do you ever, in your presentations, feel the need to see more than one generation away from the active thought on the screen at a time? Do you ever utilize the outline view or the expanded view of the brain?
That's a very good question. It's certainly one of the things, I think I've experimented with all different aspects of the brain, and a lot of this comes down to your own kind of comfort level in terms of what you're willing to explore. The rule of thumb for me is I try to do everything I do in the brain in a way that I could do it in real time if I had other people watching, kind of like this webinar if I was having a conversation. I personally challenge myself to make all of the salient information explicit on one rendering. It's actually one of the things I like to challenge myself with. So that doesn't mean outline view doesn't add value. I personally don't use it as often because, again, when I had that example originally where I was showing Barry and his talents, you recall one of the things that I did was I highlighted all of his talents and I immediately linked them to Barry so I could see it all on this page. I didn't bother trying to do an outline view that took a look at the second layer of thought, so to speak. So something I've certainly played around with, certainly willing to play around with again. At this point in my experience with the brain, I'm challenging myself this way.
Great. That's a great.
It is a great view.
Yeah, that's a great way to approach making the norm, what we call the normal view, the most getting the most value out of it. So that's fantastic. And then
of course,
got,
Matt,
sure,
while you're firing away questions, more have come in, so I'll throw a few.
Okay, go right ahead.
And one was from Marco, who would like to know how many thoughts you have in your brain.
Well, this particular brain here, and you might need to remind me, Matt, if I need to go to, I'm just
sure, over to File and under Utilities.
And Statistics. This particular brain here only has 1,000 thoughts. My work brain has 21,000 now. 21,000 thoughts, 10,000 attachments. So my style, I prefer to have everything, literally everything contained in the brain. And so when I create a file, when I create a brain zip, all of the files are all there because I use attachments extensively. So my brain's about 8 gigs. Has 10,000 attachments, 21,000 thoughts.
So do you have project-specific brains then, Omar, or do you have, obviously sounds like you have the one major brain that's 21,000 thoughts, no small feat, of course. Is that your main brain? Do you keep everything in that one brain, or do you have other smaller brains as well?
I just keep everything in one brain. What I might do, for example, when I created the succession planning section here, I had a separate brain to just create it, But then once I've created it, once it feels stable, so to speak, in terms of how I want to approach it, I then basically copy it and put it into my working brain. So I rely on, I have a couple of extra brains for webinars like this, or where I'm trying out an idea, but I always bring it all back to my main brain. So another rule of thumb for me is I have one brain.
Right, and that's a very common thing with some of our power users and big thinkers. I know, of course, Jerry Mikulski's, and in that case, I know Harlan Hugh, the inventor of the software, also has sort of the one brain. Now, of course, that's not to say I know lots of great executives and users who have multiple brains per project, but it is interesting to explore, and get a take on, different people's approach to the software, for sure. And Omer, there's another question coming in from Jocelyn. She was wondering, what is focus area number 2? She says she's just curious.
Oh, okay. Let's go see. Focus area number 2. So for me, health is whether it be kind of physical health or emotional health, or where I capture my strong moments. One of the things that I do have under health in my real brain, I just hadn't made the link here, but I'll be glad to show you, is if I go to something called 4 Disciplines of Execution. So here's another approach to execution that I read that I find quite interesting. One of the examples is this one here, which is related to kind of a goal, a weight goal. And this methodology kind of recommends lead indicators and lag indicators, and you can see 2 projects that I've got, 2 recurring projects on activities that I try to do towards this healthy goal. And you can see in week 1, so my goal is to limit 2 desserts per week and work out 4 times a week. And you can see in week 1 that I have 3 greens and 3 reds. So that tells you instantly whether I was on track or not for week 1. And so it's things like this so you see how this area here now presents as a score. The thought types present as a score. So this would be an example of something I would have in my focus area 2. And let me put it there right now because I hadn't done that before. So I use the term health in its most general sense here, whether it be physical, emotional, mental. Any other questions? Matt or Shelley?
Yes, actually there were quite a few more questions, so we'll do another 5 minutes on some questions. One is sort of a series of questions, which I think we covered, but we'll just let you kind of give a abbreviated answer to this question. It's from Gerwin, and he would like to know, Omer, are you working alone or in a team? How do you organize task management with this team? How do you delegate a task, a project, and how do you make a due date or project on a task?
Okay, that's a very good question. So in my time at RIM, the first kind of half of my career at RIM, I've been at RIM a little over 2 years, I was an individual contributor. I now work with a team, and a team of primarily project managers and business analysts. And I haven't used TheBrain yet to facilitate doing a team project together, although I intend to. And one of the things that's actually on my agenda for my ops review meetings is to maybe start with this approach here, where as a team, we'll take 10 or 15 minutes and just kind of go through all these steps to framing out a project. And if there are any project managers on the call, I don't want you to feel like I'm recommending that you throw the whole project manager body of knowledge. In fact, on the contrary, I'm kind of saying this helps you frame getting the maximal use out of it. So one of the things I plan to do with my team is that we're going to, as a group, approach a project together using this methodology. So we're into the experimental areas now. I haven't tried this yet, but that's what I intend to do next. I'd be glad to do another webinar in the future, assuming the approach works well with the team.
Great, thanks, Omer. And one last question for me that I can sort of pick out of the batch, and there's quite a few, but I'll just throw this one out as well. the icons that you're using are just a huge, huge hit. Where do you find your icons? Do you create your own, or do you just get them off the web?
A bit of combination of all of the above, Matt. So these ones here are simply just me kind of creating them in PowerPoint. And I did that because I wasn't exactly sure what I wanted, so I wanted the opportunity to kind of play around with them. So that's where those come from. This, I think I got somewhere from the web. This one I kind of created on my own, and this one I created on my own. I do have, for example, so take a look at this thought icon here. So one thing I might do is, let's say I am creating within the Getting Things Done methodology. Let's say I want to change. Let's say this project here is going to have its own thought icon. One of the things that I tend to do is, if I just go here and go to capture thought icon, I might just grab that, and it's as simple as that. So I have all kinds of different ways that I grab images, including what I just showed you.
Great, and just so everyone knows, also when you make your brain available for sharing, people will be able to gather those icons. Those icons will be included in the brain, so people will be able to continue on using those icons in their own brain as well.
And if those of you do want some structured icons, feel free to write into support@thebrain.com or email me. We do have an icon library that we can send your way meanwhile. Jeff has another question about whether or not, Omar, you link to documents or move documents in your brain, or if in fact you do have, files within your brain.
That's a good question. And again, there's so much flexibility here. You can go either way. My personal choice has been to import everything right into the brain, and which is why I have over 10,000 attachments. So I tend to bring the document right into the brain. Let me show you an example of that. If I take you to the 6 Pillars of Self-Esteem, let me take you to something called What Got You Here Won't Get You There. It's a book written by a fellow named Marshall Goldsmith. I've read the book, and I kind of summarized these habits he talked about into a PowerPoint, which I have residing right in the brain. And I've also got right in the brain, if someone finds that interesting, I've got an email all ready to go. If someone says, I like that, can you send me more information about it? I just click on this email, and I can just send it. And so I like having everything resident in the brain. If I then create a brain zip, I can take it and basically have peace of mind and know that everything, literally everything is contained in that zip.
Excellent. And then there are a couple users, R. David and Gerwin, and I'm not sure if you use these in your own brain, but people are asking about reminder thoughts. So, I don't know if you do use reminder thoughts in your own brain, but certainly that can be done through the calendar. You can set up reminders for different events as well.
Mm-hmm. I did have I tried Reminder, and I have a thought that would actually present every morning at 10 o'clock, and it would be a reminder around how I want to approach a healthy goal. So I did play around with that approach. Because I tend to use the Outlook calendar for the most part related to my work, I haven't been using the calendar within the brain as much as others might. So I've played around with Reminder, but it's not something I'm using regularly.
Right. So that is a feature that is we're happy to send you more information, or anyone who is interested in that. We also do have Google Calendar synchronization within Personal Brain. And now switching to another quick question, Omar. John was wondering where he could find a copy of the creativity paper you mentioned.
Well, if John wants to send me an email, and let me just go back to where I was showing my email here. So there's my email, John. If you send me a note, I'd be glad to send you that creativity template.
All right, excellent. And I think with that, we're probably going to close today's session. We are in overtime, and I want to thank you, Omar, for answering all our questions and staying a little later. There's a final comment, a note from Dan. He says, Omar, this is fantastic. I've done a lot of trial and error using my own brain, but seeing your thought processes and how you use it in real life is wonderful. Thank you. And I'd like to echo Dan's sentiments and thank you on behalf of the Brain and the rest of the group. And I guess, Matt, before we close the session, since you've been monitoring Q&A throughout the entire session, was there any other final questions we need to get in before we close our session today?
I think we answered most of the questions in general. Unfortunately, we weren't able to demo all of the features of the Brain, such as the syncing capabilities and so on that we discussed. But just a reminder to everyone that we do host on a weekly basis on Tuesdays and Fridays the Brain 101. So typically smaller classes, we are able to answer all of the questions that come in and customize the demo to sort of feature answers to those questions. So please feel free to join us for a Brain 101 as well, or contact us at support@thebrain.com. But I think the overwhelming feeling of the demo today in the QA is what a fantastic Brain, and thank you, Omar, for being so generous and sharing it with us.
My pleasure. I really, really enjoy doing these webinars. I always, just even explaining how I approach it gives me other ideas. So thank you very much for giving me the opportunity. It was great, and I really appreciate that last comment as well. It's a very nice way to end the webinar.
All right, great. Well, with that, we're going to close today's session, and I hope that all of you create some new strong moments and assess your own talents and insights within your brain, and we do offer free technical support for all users. There will be a recording of this session available later today or probably tomorrow, and feel free to email myself, and I can answer any questions through the webinar invite, and of course put you in touch with Omar if you are interested in inquiring further. So thanks for your time today. And with that, we're going to close our session and wish everyone a happy holidays and good luck in moving from efficiency to peak performance. Thanks, everyone.